Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Hello, welcome to Paraversal Universe, where all paranormal perspectives apply. Join paranormal historian and mythologist Kevin Malek and psychic demonologist Jennifer Malek as they navigate us through the different categories of the unknown and the unexplained, including ghosts and haunted places, cryptids and monsters, aliens and UFOs, theology and mythology, metaphysics, forbidden archaeology, urban legends and folklore, conspiracies, crimes, and corruption, with top analysis from the experts of these disciplines. If it's amazing, unusual, or mysterious, if it's bizarre, creepy, and fantastic, if it's unbelievable, paranormal, or supernatural, it's here on Paraversal Universe. Here are your hosts, Kevin and Jennifer.
Hello everyone. Whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are, welcome to Paraversal Universe, brought to you by the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society Limited at the Northwoods Paranormal Resource Center here in Rylander, Wisconsin. We're your hosts, Kevin and Jennifer Malek.
Hello and happy Friday, everybody.
Paraversal Universe is produced by Kat Hobson, the voice of Fate Magazine Radio over at WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. We're also heard on WCET 101.7 FM out of Columbia, South Carolina, and the Rift Radio Network family based out of Lakeside, Virginia. Welcome one and all. We look forward to your questions and comments as always. The archive of the show will be available as well. Show archives from over the years can be found in various places on the web, including our archives-like page on Facebook called Paraversal Universe Show Archives. Also check out our guest promo page, Paraversal Universe Radio, for what's upcoming in the near future. We hope everyone's doing well. As always, we are now into October, Halloween month. We had a wonderful time last week at the Paranomicon. What an awesome event that was. And now we are back with a fantastic show. Today we are going to talk to esoteric and biblical historian Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, about dogmen and demigods. But first, as always, let's do our shoutouts. Shoutouts go to those people who share our show banners on a regular basis, or recently, that we are aware of. We always appreciate it greatly and thank you kindly. And we have a big list today. So, who do we have, Jen?
This week we have Walt Christos, Thoughts of Christos, Katrina Cooper, Rhodey Speak, Dennis Koch, Cindy Liu, Robert Bull, Howie Aldell, The Orion Effect, Jean Broida, Metaphysical Bounce, Kat Hobson, WBHM, Lawrence DeMisa, Lisa Reynaga, Sudan, Laurie Kreslaw, Ty Ward, Steve Carrington, Anomalous Universe, Dr. Chuck Kennedy, Project PSI Institute, Fate Magazine Radio, Clairvoyance, Todd David Anderson, Beyond Ultra Popular, Jock Brokus, Paranormal Daily News, DM Siegling, Felix De La Cruz, Angel Zia, Michelle Jacquees, Tom McGuire, Chuck Herring, Gavin Lee Davies, The Paranormal Chronicles, Mark Jesus, Tom Conwell, Tim Conwell, and Tobias Wayland, singular 14.
Wow. Thank you so much, everyone. We can't tell you how much we appreciate that, helping us get this content spread out there across social media. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Alrighty. Gary Wayne is a Christian contrarian who has maintained a lifelong affair with biblical prophecy, history, and mythology. He is an author of the critically acclaimed book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. We have Gary on the show once before to discuss giants and the Nephilim. That interview can be found at Paraversal Universe show archives on Facebook or on Blog Talk under Paraversal Universe. This time we have brought Gary on to discuss another aspect of antiquity and the unknown and unexplained, which may also tie into the modern-day cryptid reports. And that would be about the demigods and demigod races of old, mentioned in many different sources regarding ancient hybridization of humans with other species, be it by genetic modification or by interbreeding between the sons of God and the daughters of men. Gary has done extensive research into the tales and history of old, canon, and non, and what we will be discussing is truly some uncommon knowledge and totally fascinating stuff. Shall we bring him on?
Yes, let's bring him on.
Gary, are you with us?
I am, and so happy to be with you this afternoon and evening for the people on the East Coast. And I think the topic that we're going to talk about is absolutely fascinating, and I think we're going to provide some significant information that people just might not be aware of because it's kind of one of those niche sort of mythoses out there, and but there's a lot more to the information than what most people realize.
Right. And there is I've been looking into this for years, and I still come across new stuff. And you've done a fascinating job researching this. And it's good to have you back on. And we really enjoyed your interview last time. Since you've been on before, we can skip the formalities and get right to the topic, right? And the show is built dogmen, lion men, and demigod races. And, of course, for everyone listening, when I say demigod races, I mean things like minotaurs, centaurs, satyrs, etc., of which there are actually a lot of references when one digs really deep. And you've done just that. Any beginning thoughts to lead us off?
Yeah, so I think I want to sort of make clear this is one of the topics that, I did not put into my book, although you get a concept of how this whole ideology is related. And the reason why I didn't put it into my book is I just thought it was going down a stream that was going to make the book extraordinarily long because of all the information on there. And so I focused more on the serpent aspect of these type of hybrid beings that we're going to talk about today, about the dogmen. And so I put this information together from the research that I did because I'm a history buff and I'm a mythology buff, and I'm also a prophecy buff and a prehistory buff. And I kind of like to put all my, sort of passions together when I do writing and things like that. So I got a lot of requests about saying, well, what are your thoughts on the dogmen? And I got so many requests on it. I thought, you know what? I have information on this. It shouldn't take too long to dig into it and assemble it. So I put out a 3-part series on this out on Facebook, which is, what we're going to cover off today. So, yeah, I thought maybe I should just throw that out there in sort of the understanding that this is all sort of interconnected with what my specialty is in terms of the Genesis 6 conspiracy and giants. It's just another sort of parallel lane that I think that it fits in with, along with, the linemen of Moab and giants that look like lions.
Right. And we have so many people that have come forward over time with different stories. And it's happening today. Of course, here in Wisconsin, the dogman is popular in the cryptid world. There are reports and whatnot. And for me, I like to see history behind stuff. And there is certainly a lot of historical documentation and references to dogmen. And as you said, we'll use the 3 articles as a guide for today's interview. And they're really well done, I must say. So, and it starts with biblical references to wolves and what they represent. Should we start with that?
We can start with that, absolutely. And again, in case the audience is not aware of, generally how I come about things, I am a Christian, and I like to measure everything against what it has to say in the Bible. And so in the Bible, we don't get sort of explicit references to dogmen or dog warriors, but we get a lot of references to dogs and the ideology and understanding of this concept of dogmen that I like to call dog warriors, and probably dog Nephilim, and we'll flesh that out the further that we go. So we're going to cover off some of that, and just in case people aren't aware of the concept of what I'm talking about in terms of Nephilim, that's the word for giant that's used in Genesis 6 verses 1 through 4, Numbers 13:33 twice, and then the rest of the references to giant that show up in the Bible from a King James Version translation perspective is Rapha and Rephaim for the male plural, just as Nephil comes from the word fall, and the tyrants and giants, and the I am is the male plural on that aspect of it. So that's how I try and tie everything sort of back to it. Does it have a biblical connection? And then how does that match up with historical accounts? And how does that match up with other religions and other mythologies? And so when we're talking about what the Bible says about dogs, it actually says a lot about dogs, but none of it is in a pleasant sort of way for the most part. So we get, dogs that are spoken of as either allegorically or physically, and kind of at the same time, both ways in a lot of applications in the Bible. They're, described as evildoers or false prophets and sorcerers and idolaters and murderers, and even a connection to mercenaries as you look at all of these different meanings, and they're seemingly grouped in a lot of biblical passages, which is very odd with these sort of dark beasts, some of what you were referencing to earlier, Kevin, in terms of the satyrs and or the unicorns, which is biblically a bull as opposed to a one-horned horse, as you take that back to Hebrew, dragons and owls and ravens, and also used in around in context of Rephaim and Nephilim and the royal bloodlines that the Nephilim are thought to have begat by usurping the kingships in the antediluvian world, and then again in the post-diluvian world, and those would be sort of the Rephaim kingship. So that's what we're probably going to talk more as a reference on as a connection to giants. We use the Rephaim term as opposed to the Nephilim term. One is post-diluvian, Rephaim, antediluvian or before the flood would be Nephilim. So when we look at how the Bible, looks on these animals, they look at as a very lowly type of beast. And really, when we think about dogs, who doesn't like most dogs? They're so the most enjoyable, friendly, man's best friend, and yet biblically, we get these horrible references to dogs all the way throughout. Whether or not you're talking about, Philippines 3:2, it says, beware of dogs, grouped with evil workers, and Revelation 22, it says things like, for without are dogs and sorcerers and whoremongers and murderers and idolaters, and whosoever loveth make a lie. And it's like, wow, like what is going on here? Why is there such a relationship with evil, sort of like what serpents are grouped together in the Bible? And that's kind of where it started to pique my interest when I was doing my early research on giants and Nephilim was like, why are they looked upon so poorly, and why do they seem to be grouped around these other sort of beasts? And so when we look at the word dog, in the New Testament, it goes back to a word called kun, which means hound dog, and figuratively as impure. And then when you look at the overall sort of mythos on dogmen, it's called, xenocephaly. And that, is rooted in kaino and for dog, and cephaly or cephaly, and you can pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced both ways, so it could be called kynocephaly or cynocephaly or cynocephaly. And you got, you pick your pronunciation on that.
Tomato or
but
tomato.
The cephaly, or the cephaly is known as head. So cynocephaly roots back to this understanding of dog head and dog-headed beings. And so when we start to overlay that word kun is deeply connected, as it should be, as being a Greek word as it's used in the New Testament, it seems to have the same sort of meaning and connection back to the same kind of ideology about dogs. And then when you get into whether or not it's secular or other religions, or into what the Bible says, it sort of links back to this sort of dog-headed being sort of thing. And so when I looked at, closer to how this connection might be there, Matthew 7 stood out to me, where you have a demon-possessed a child who is feeding dogs under the table. And there's a direct connection in there that talks about these demons who are connected with the dogs. And it's if you're feeding those dogs, you're feeding the demons. And again, demons are the bodiless spirits of giants. So I'm kind of thinking, okay, that's an interesting sort of allegory that's going on there, but is there kind of more to it? And when you look at like Psalms 59, you get this other kind of odd sort of connection with the dogs as well, because in Psalms 59 it talks about delivering me from the workers of iniquity and save me from bloody men. And again, you kind of wonder about, are these talking about mercenaries or warriors, or just evil doers in general who kill people? And as it moves on, it talks about they return at evening and they make the noise of a dog. Behold, they belch out with their mouth and their swords in their lips. And so again, you get this allegory that is connecting dogs somehow to warriors that are very much connected to Rephaim and very much connected to kings and the warrior offspring that dominated both the antediluvian world and the post-diluvian world. And so all of a sudden I'm starting to think, there's might be a little bit more to this than what first meets the eye. And then you get this real interesting account in 2 Samuel and 1 Samuel, where it's talking about the David and Goliath account. And Goliath is from Gath, and David picks up 5 smooth stones, and people are kind of like, well, why 5 smooth stones? Well, Gath is part of a pentapolis of cities, so 5 cities, and the kings were led by giants, and Goliath is from Gath, which is one of those 5 cities. And I think David was looking at killing 5 giants that day if he had to, but he only needed to use 1 stone to kill Goliath, and then took his head, which is another concept we'll probably come back to. And so when I look at that, then I look at what Goliath said to. Go ahead.
Can we pause right here? And
yeah, it's time for our first commercial break. You are listening to Paraversal Universe. We will be right back with our guest for the next segment.
You are listening to WBHM-DB, WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
To the believer, the evidence is overwhelming. To the skeptic, there will never be enough. Hello everyone. Join Kevin and Jennifer Malek, the host of Paraversal Universe, every Friday here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Also heard on WCET-FM and The Rift. Log on or tune in as they check out the mysteries found within the 8 categories of the unknown and unexplained, including ghosts and haunted places, aliens and UFOs, theology and mythology, cryptids and monsters, urban legends and folklore, conspiracies, metaphysics, and forbidden archaeology. Listen as Kevin and Jennifer interview the top minds in their respective fields as they share theories and information regarding these unsolved mysteries. For future show and archive information, one can find Paraversal Universe on Facebook, Twitter, and MeWe under various Paraversal Universe headings. So, for excellent talk radio about the unknown and unexplained, check out Paraversal Universe, where all paranormal perspectives apply. Brought to you by the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society, Ltd., and produced by WBHM-DB.com.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back from our first commercial break, everyone. This is Paraversal Universe, produced by WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Also heard on WCET-FM and the Rift Radio Network. We're your hosts, Kevin and Jennifer Malek, and we'd like to take a minute to thank everyone who makes Paraversal Universe possible, including graphic art director Lawrence D. Meza, music theme by Matt Stenz, announcer Frank Lee, producer and owner at WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Kat Hobson, also the Howie Odell and Lisa Renaga and the Rift family, and the Michael Vera over at WCET-FM. Thank you all for carrying our content and working together on our behalf and the behalf of our audience everywhere. And of course, a huge thank you to God in heaven, whose strength beyond strength is stronger than all, for granting us this wonderful show and opportunity here to be with you all.
Amen.
And appreciation to all the various platforms we are on, including Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Twitch, YouTube, Daily Motion, TalkStream Live, TuneIn, Blog Talk, Podbean, Google Play, Mixcloud, and Paranormal Radio Livestream app, which is streamed and restreamed from various other outlets all over the world via the internet. Alrighty, this segment of Paraversal Universe is brought to you by the UFO Wisconsin Research Team, Wisconsin's alternative to MUFON, and also by the Paranormal Daily News, who now have a page on their website dedicated to Paraversal Universe, including the Paralogian Report, where our latest episodes are listed and linked. This is Paraversal Universe, and we are speaking with esoteric and biblical historian Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And we were talking about dog men, demigods, and things from antiquity. Gary, are you with us?
I am. And before the break, I was just talking about the encounter of David with a giant, a Rephaim, Goliath, and that I should make the connection when we're talking about, for the most part, giants in the biblical account. They're the offspring of angels, and in other religions, those would be the gods, and with a human female to create a demigod, which was a giant. And typically the ones that are discussed in the biblical have more of a connection back to the serpent angels, the seraphim angels, the fiery serpents. And just as you've got dragons and serpent gods all over the earth, and their offspring representative royal families around the world are represented in most cases, not all cases, as a serpent. This is who the Rephaim Goliath, who was 6 cubits in a span, so he was anywhere from 9 feet 9 inches to 11 feet 2 inches, depending on whether or not you're using a common or a royal cubit. And I think royal because, as I mentioned before, the break, that he was likely the king of Gath, and he was the one representing the Philistines at this battle. And he says to David, am I a dog that you come to me with staves? And he's not getting the respect of a full-geared warrior coming out. This little boy with 5 stones and a slingshot is going to take on this giant of huge proportions. And he uses the word dog there, and I think it's because within this concept of the offspring of the gods who produced giants and warriors and the elite class after their own image, which we'll talk about later in the show, is that somehow, for some reasons, within that sort of cult or culture, the dog warrior is held in less regard than the serpent one, the serpent like giants and or the lion like giants. And there are others too that we'll probably touch on before the show is out. So, and then also when we look at the Bible and looking at some of the references, and I'll get out some of the references and get into a little bit more specific. In Psalms 22, you have all of these dog-like beings surrounding Jesus on the cross, and with all of these other beast-like images that are, mocking Jesus and taunting Jesus. And this is a prophecy coming out of Psalms for when Jesus is going to be on the cross. And these are, again, depicted in some of the pictures in Eastern Christian religion as warriors surrounding the cross. So again, sort of linking all of this kind of back into the giant and the giant warrior sort of mythos that is this sort of common heritage around the world. So when we're talking about these dogs and the references in the Bible, I just want to bring in another concept of the cynocephaly mythos of the dog warriors, which is about the werewolves or the lycanthropy, and these have a very similar sort of relationship and perhaps origin to the dog warrior and dog Nephilim, and even from an etymological basis as it connects back into the Bible. And so lycan is, Greek for wolf, and thropes is wolf person. So person would be the second part, or person. And in the Greek tradition of the changeling, werewolf, which is a little bit different than the dog warrior, because typically you don't see them depicted or talked about as changelings, but of course the werewolf has this changing capability, which again seems to be part of the changeling capability of the gods and or the fallen angels, but for some reason the dog warriors don't have that. But in the Greek tradition, King Lycon of Arcadia is changed into a werewolf for not honoring the gods in the way that they wanted him to honor it, with the respect and sacrifices and feasts and things like that. And so King Lycon and all of his family were changed into werewolves and are depicted thereafter as this hero. And you might see in some of the English translations of the Bible of Genesis 1:6-4, it won't say mighty ones, it'll say hero or heroes of old. And that's because a hero was the offspring of a Greek god and a human female, just as Hercules was, and they were considered demigods, and demigods, understood in the ancient definition, is the offspring of the gods and a human female. And Lycon is one of these offspring who is changed into a werewolf. So again, you get this connection back into the sort of dog mythos, but it's a little bit different sort of lane for it. But it also maybe hints at to why the particular Nephilim or Rephaim after the flood, as it goes with Goliath, is talking about dogs so poorly, and why dogs are also talked about poorly in the Bible as these beast-like creatures, because they maybe don't have the same sort of royal beginnings, and that they were somehow changed by the gods somehow, some way. Just sort of throwing that out. And the reason why I want to bring that up is because it links back into the Bible with the term wolf. And wolf goes back to the Hebrew word zeb. And zeb, gets us into some other different sort of meanings and people of the Bible that have a connection back to this sort of warrior sort of concept. And in Judges 7, you have two Median kings. One name is Oreb, and the other one is Zeb. And Zeb goes back to the Hebrew word wolf. So what we have now here is two Median kings, and these are likely, because most of the kings, as I said earlier, were all kings and royal bloodlines of Rephaim after the flood, so they seem to be named after a dog. This one is named after a dog-like Rephaim who is lined up in a war against the Israelites and trying to wipe them from the face of the earth. And the Midianites are partners and allies with King Og and King Sihon of Bashan, where Mount Hermon is where the Rephaim are created after the flood and likely before the flood in the Bashan region, and they are warring against Israel. And so again, you get this relationship to the Rephaim, and they're also allies with the Amalekim, understanding that the Amalekim are derived from a marriage between Eliphaz, son of Esau, brother of Jacob, who creates Israel, and Timnah, who is the daughter of Seir, who is a Horim and a Rephaim. And they create this greater Amalekite nation that wants to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, and I think to steal the covenant blessings, birthright, and Messianic promise, and replace it with a dragon king, which is an antichrist type sort of understanding and prophetic implication to it. And so again, you get all of this connection that links back, just as the other king is called Oreb, and that goes back to the word and connected to ravens and or owls. And the reason why that's important is not only do you have some owls that are listed and ravens in the Bible, and like Isaiah 13 and 34 that are connected in this whole dark beast thing that I was talking about previously, but you also have the connection to the Anunnaki, who are these bird-like angels that also produced offspring that would have looked just like them. And you would have the same case in Egypt for like the Horus offspring. And I might touch on that a little bit later. And this is very, very similar to the Tengu of Southeast Asia, who also have that same sort of look. So now you have two kings that are depicted with the same imagery as polytheist accounts and secular accounts of the legends and or religion of those nations and cultures around the world of the offspring of some of the gods. And what they do with these two Median gods is they cut their heads off, just as David cuts off the head of Goliath. And again, the thought is that the reason why they're cutting off the heads, that's the only way to cut off the heads of these Rephaim or giant type individuals, which again we'll see in some of the European accounts.
Right, because that's how they killed them back then. And
seemingly that was the only way, and that sort of appears when you get into the vampire mythos with Dracula, either stake through the heart or cut their head off, or both. And it seems again to have that same sort of understanding, especially when you understand that the Dracula and vampire tales are based on the Nephilim, complete with the drinking of blood to try and retain their immortality and to give a higher sort of cognizance to their brain activities.
So next I have Psalms and Dogs and Jude before the Gideon narrative. So can you discuss the Gideon narrative?
And we talked about Psalm 22 a little bit earlier in terms of the being around the cross, and also sort of connect that back to Jude in a couple of minutes. But most people will point to a narrative, as you're referencing, in the time of Gideon, who's one of the judges in the age of the judges, and that's Judges 6 and 7. And Gideon is going to go up against people like the Amalekim and the Midianites again, and all of these people who were intertwined and intermarried with the various Rephaim out of the covenant land area and the greater area. And he is going to select people with God's advice from people who do not drink from leaning on their knees and taking water up to their mouth, because that was typically a ritual of Baal worship and polytheism in terms of how they did their daily rituals. So they would have done that out of habit. And we're told to select the ones who lapped up the water like dogs. And what's interesting about that is that most people will say, well, that's the smoking gun, that these were dog warriors or dog Nephilim, but these were Israelites, so I don't think that they were dog Nephilim or dog Rephaim or dog warriors. And we don't get any descriptions of them that way. Now, they select 300 of them to show the power of God to take on this war and win the war. But it sort of, again, has that sort of connection that suggests that they may have been very powerful warriors and sort of dog-like in that sort of allegory. But I don't look at that as saying that these were, dog Nephilim. But again, I think there's an allegory in there that takes us in that direction. And when we look at, and you're referencing Jude 1, we're talking about, again, just to underline what you're saying, in Jude 1, it talks about the angels who didn't leave their first estate. And these are the ones that are locked into the abyss for their crimes against the laws of creation. The impassioned angels who have sex in Genesis 6 with human females. And because of that, they're locked into the abyss. And one presumes if there's a second incursion and giants do show up after the flood, that if there was a second incursion, those angels are going to be locked into the abyss as well. And you'll see how that sort of comes into play is a little bit further down the road. And so what we do get that sort of leads us in this sort of direction then as we take these accounts, whether it's Gideon or Psalms 22 or the Goliath account, is when we get into a very interesting fellow by the name of Caleb. And Caleb is a Kenizzite, an unaccounted for people in the Bible. And so when you get the Table of Nations listing when Kenizzites come in, you actually have them listed in the Bible before they were created. And so a lot of people think these are people that took on, that are either hybrid Rephaim or Rephaim, and they've taken on a name that connects them back to actually Cain, as you take that back in its history. But what's interesting, though, this is an individual that's going to be part of the spies for Israel that Moses sends into the land of Canaan that's overflowing with Rephaim and the Anakim, as they're described. And Anakim goes back in Deuteronomy 2 to being giants or Rephaim as well. And he is the one that is part of, with Joshua, as part of telling the accurate part of the story and not embellishing, but these are still giants. And so the interesting thing about Caleb, other than his connections back to Kenizzites, is his name goes back to, a Hebrew word, Caleb, which is H3611, and it's defined as yelp or dog, attack dog, and mercenary. And these are exactly what the dog warriors were. So again, this doesn't seem to be necessarily his original name. It may be his title as a mercenary who comes from outside of Israel to help. And he actually helps drive out the Rephaim out of the Hebron area, or the area that's most sort of flooded with giants in the southern part, although they're all through. And the other interesting thing is about the name of Caleb, is it goes back to another Hebrew word as part of the series of words, which is Calebo, 3614, and as a patriarch for a tribe of people. And we don't get anything about this in the Bible. This is just a Hebrew word that's sort of connected and part of a series of words, and or the Calebim, which is, or the Calebi, depending. There's two different ways of extending that out into plural, and Calebim would be the male plural as Rephaim and Nephilim, and these are like dog Nephilim, right? And it's like, even though we don't get them listed in the Bible, we get that in the Hebrew etymology and the words. And so it's just so very interesting that we get all of these connections to a possibility of Nephilim, dog Nephilim, and or dog warriors that seem to be a little bit as a lower class of the whole sort of giant kind of narrative. So I'll let you back in there, because I think I just probably raised a lot of questions.
Actually, you timed that right.
Perfect timing.
It is time for our next commercial break. You are listening to Paraversal Universe. We'll be right back with Gary for our next segment.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama. Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Abnormal Alabama presents Crypticon October 25th and 26th at the Port in the Wharf, Orange Beach. Bigfoot, the paranormal, authors and speakers, vendors, and your chance to experience the Psychomantheum. There'll be a costume contest and much, much more. October 25th and 26th at the Port in the Wharf, Orange Beach. Get more info, directions, and tickets available now at Abnormal Alabama.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Abnormal Alabama presents Crypticon October 25th and 26th at the Port in the Wharf, Orange Beach. Bigfoot, the paranormal, authors and speakers, vendors, and your chance to experience the Psychomantheum. There'll be a costume contest and much, much more. October 25th and 26th at the Port of the Wharf, Orange Beach. Get more info, directions, and tickets available now at abnormalalabama.com. That's abnormalalabama.com.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Paraversal Universe. This is Kevin and Jennifer Malek. And on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Also heard on WCET-FM and the Rift Radio Network. We're your hosts, Kevin and Jennifer Malek, as I just said. So I got distracted for a sec. Before we get back to the show, we want to tell you all that we're also on MeWe and Twitter. Our like and group pages on Facebook are under various headings as well. Having said that, check out our Society's like page on Facebook, the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society Limited, as well as Jennifer's like page, Jennifer Malek, Psychic Demonologist. Leave a like if you like what you see, and we will always appreciate it. And the segment is brought to you by the Paranormal Chronicles and also by the book Trail of the Sasquatch, A Shaman's Journey by cryptozoologist and Iroquois shaman Don Young, who's also a member of the NWPS. Check out his Facebook group pages, Kindred Forest and Indigenous Americas. Any comments for this week's show can be addressed in the chat room live. Let's get back to the show. This is Paraversal Universe, and we are talking to esoteric and biblical historian Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, about dog men. Are you with us, Gary?
I am, and looking forward to continuing as to what we were talking about just before the break. And so hopefully we're not losing people out there and we're connecting some dots for them. One of the things that, when I look at from a biblical perspective again is that can I connect anything sort of back as we go on this? And so are there any sort of references to these various angels or gods of other accounts that sort of connect some dots here? And we get a couple of loose ones that I'll just sort of kind of throw out. And so in that understanding of the word Caleb, we get in 1 Chronicles 2 a location named Caleb Apharata. And that obviously means dog or hound dog or bark or depending on how you want to select the meaning for Caleb for there. And then the second word is actually meaning a dog ash heap. And this is located in Egypt. And it's kind of interesting about that because, and we'll come back to this later, there's a significant amount of information of civilizations and cities of dog people and dog warriors that are connected to gods like Anubis, who have the face of a dog and are in legend and other accounts around the world with gods like them to have created offspring. And so Anubis is depicted as a guard dog for the gods in the Egyptian temples. So this is not something that people are not familiar with. It's just like, how's that sort of related to the Nephilim? And I think that's the connection there, that offspring were created after the gods who had sex with human females, and their offspring looked just like them. And I think there's a good possibility that the dog warriors and the dog men and the dog people were created in that sort of way. Also biblically, we get a god mentioned in the Bible called Nergal. Right. And it's interesting that Nergal means hero and is also associated with sort of the gospel, offspring of the gods or the titans or the heroes like Hercules as a hero of old. And again, one wonders whether or not there's a connection there that is a, sort of a primordial god or a lower god, or where does he fit in? And it's interesting he's got that definition and understanding as the name of hero. And typically Nergal is a Chaldean or an Syrian god that's depicted as a man lion that's equal to the god of Mars and is very much associated with dogs and wolves, which is probably the closest that we can sort of tie him down. He was the son of Enlil and Ninil, and was depicted often with his attack dogs like Cerberus in the Greek mythology. So he was like a guard of the gods, like Anubis, and so one wonders whether or not he also had a dog face or not, but he's depicted as sometimes with a dog face and other times as a lion's head. So you pick the one that you want, but we also know that angels and gods seem to have a changeling ability, so maybe he appeared as both. And so other accounts that we would have in the Bible in terms of connecting gods or dog Rephaim comes in 2 Kings with a god being worshipped by the name of Nebaz, which is an Avim god. And Avim is listed in the Bible as part of the Rephaim. And of course, they're in the Philistine area where the Philistines lived and are part of the Rephaim that are living amongst and ruling and creating hybrid offspring along with other Rephaim that are there. But that's another rabbit hole. And that goes back, as you take that back into it as in its meaning as being the barker. And he's depicted again in ancient icons and idols as this dog-headed sort of god. So we do have this sort of understanding now that you have an Avim who are a type of Rephaim who are worshiping a barking dog like Anubis that's listed in the Bible. So again, we don't have a smoking gun verse, but we get all of these sort of interesting sort of connections that get back to the sort of dog Nephilim narrative.
Right. And of course, the next one on the list, and one of my favorite examples, is Saint Christopher.
Yeah. So as we move into some more Christian accounts, as we move into, after the death of Jesus on the cross, you start to get into some significant detail of who these Nephilim actually are, or the Rephaim actually were after the flood. And so we have several different accounts that come out of Armenian accounts, Greek Orthodox, and out of the Catholic accounts. So I'm going to begin with the with sort of the Catholic account. And in the Catholic tradition, we get an account of Saint Christopher, who is depicted as a foreign king's son. So again, you start thinking of kings and bloodlines and dynasties, and that these were begat by the Rephaim after the flood. And so we get some instant sort of connections there. And he's captured in North Africa, which will be important as we go on here. And then he converts to Christianity. And what he does afterwards is he carries travelers across the river, suggesting he's very, very strong, sort of giant-like in strength and size with what he's doing. And so in the biblical laying out of history, you have Canaan as being the brother of Put, and Put settles in Libya. So again, you get this sort of migration, and of course, St. Christopher is captured in North Africa where Put settles. And St. Christopher in the Catholic tradition was thought of as a Rephaim or Rephaim hybrid who also traveled to Libya and the land of Put. And so as we start to dig into some of the details of St. Christopher, what we find out is that after Christopher's conversion, he subdued his pride, understanding that Rephaim and Nephilim were hubris or proud, and that was part of their downfall that led them to rebel against God and to turn against humankind and to essentially enslave humankind and impose their feudal system over them. And so he subdues his pride as being a royal bloodline of the kings and his great size and strength. So obviously beforehand, he was displaying it in a very proud way. After his conversion, he becomes humble. And he puts those attributes to work, as I said, in taking people across the river. And his name is Reprobus, which is really kind of an odd name as his original name. So I'm not sure whether or not that is being added to sort of the legend, because, that's essentially reprobate or morally depraved and rejected by God, as what Rephaim were, which may be how he was considered. So I think it might have been added on. Now, these St. Christopher accounts take place in between 200 and 300 AD, and there will be a few different dates, but not all of the accounts are going to line up perfectly as you sort of dig into the minutiae of the details. And so Emperor Decius decides he's going to deploy 400 soldiers to capture St. Christophorus, as they call him in Latin. And they were, all of these 400 were converted. But why would you have to send 400 people to capture one individual? So again, it's kind of hinting at this Rephaim sort of understanding. And then St. Christopher was tortured with plates of iron after he was captured, boiling oil. So once they sent more soldiers after St. Christopher, the soldiers, they shot him with arrows, but what they couldn't do is kill him with the arrows. So again, they had to behead him to kill him in 254 AD. And this is the same technique that we were talking about earlier in killing giants and with Goliath. So I think there's this tradition that sort of continues. And so, but the Catholic traditions don't tend to depict St. Christopher as a dog Nephilim or a dog Rephaim or dog warrior in any way. They just sort of depict him as Rephaim, a giant and of royal blood. But this dogman concept didn't just sort of go away in Catholicism, and Christopher was debated heavily, as was the concept of dogmen in Catholicism. And just as they were debating how does that fit in with Nephilim and how does that fit in with the Rephaim. So, and, some of the biggest arguments would have come with Augustine of Hippo and in the City of God when this was still raging, and probably a lot to do with, the St. Christopher story, because it's not that far afterwards. And they're talking about in the City of God, the cynocephali, whose dog-like head and barking proclaim them beasts rather than men. And so what he's talking about is with this understanding that there's this well-known knowledge of these dog-like beings that are out there in the known world. They're arguing, do they exist and where do they come from? And he says if they do exist, they are not human races, or if they are human, they are descended from Adam and would be some sort of hybrid, just as the Rephaim intermarried with human females and throughout Canaan afterwards and created a more diluted or smaller version of the same type of individuals that may have not had quite of all the same sort of attributes as those bloodlines were diluted. So these cynocephaly that's being talked about in the early Catholic period continues with another individual called Saint Mercurius.
Can we pause right here, Gary?
We certainly can. Yep.
Yeah.
My apologies, but it's about that time.
All right. We will be right back with, this is Paraversal Universe you are listening to. We will be right back with our guest, Gary, for the next segment.
A central figure in the impeachment probe behind closed doors. On Lisa Brady, Fox News. The intelligence community's inspector general giving a classified briefing to the House Intelligence Committee today as the probe, fueled by a whistleblower's complaint, continues. Democratic California Congresswoman Jackie Speer says the whistleblower revealed a criminal act.
Conspiracy to impact the American election by using a foreign power. And I can't think of anything worse.
But Republicans are pouncing on what turned out to be a false claim by the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff that there was no contact with his committee from the whistleblower before that whistleblower complaint was finished.
They are fact witnesses in the same investigation that they are now running.
That's Texas Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe. President Trump telling reporters earlier today his request to Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden and his son was only about corruption in general, not a political campaign.
I don't care about politics. I don't care about anything. But I do care about corruption.
And he says the White House is planning to send a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi urging a House vote on articles of impeachment and arguing in part that some of the president's rights in this process are being denied until that vote happens. Meantime, on Wall Street, a rally. The Dow up 370 points at the closing bell, back over 26,500. This after the jobs reports for September showed the unemployment rate falling to a 50-year low, though the number of jobs created, 136,000, was not quite what some economists had expected. America is listening to Fox News.
If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. That's the problem growing businesses have because of a hodgepodge of business systems. One for accounting, another for sales, another for inventory. If that's you, you know it's a mess that takes up too much time and too many resources. And that hurts the bottom line. You need NetSuite by Oracle, the cloud-based business management software that gives you the visibility and control you need to grow. With NetSuite, you save time, money, and unneeded headaches by managing sales, finance and accounting, orders, and HR instantly from your desktop or phone. That's why NetSuite is the world's #1 cloud business system. Companies that use NetSuite grow 3 times faster than the S&P 500. And right now, NetSuite is offering you valuable insights with a free guide, 7 key strategies to grow your profits at netsuite.com/Fox. That's netsuite.com/Fox to download your free guide, 7 key strategies to grow your profits. netsuite.com/Fox.
Another sentencing in the college admissions cheating scandal. In court today, the former head of a California winery who admitted trying to rig the SAT exam for his daughter and bribing her way into the University of Southern California.
Prosecutors have argued he is unique among the parents that have admitted guilt in connection with the college admissions scandal, that he is worse because he chose to participate in both paths available in this scheme. In other words, the test cheating route as well as the faking of athletic credentials. Prosecutors say this wealthy Vinter, whose family operates several wineries in Napa, California, agreed to pay $50,000 to have his daughter's SAT score inflated and another $250,000 to have her recruited to the water polo team at the University of Southern California. Prosecutors are asking that the judge sentence Unias to 15 months in prison, noting he pulled his daughter into the fraud.
The defense wanted much less time, and it came somewhere near the middle. The sentence today, 5 months in prison and a $100,000 fine. Actress and singer Diane Carroll has died. Her daughter says the Oscar-nominated and groundbreaking entertainer had cancer. She was 84.
Carroll was best known for starring in the 60s TV series Julia, the first series about a black professional woman. She earned a Tony Award for the musical No Strings and an Oscar nomination for 1974's Claudine.
If you've been seeing this man... Well, what is this? Am I not supposed to see a man? What am I, a damn nun?
In the 80s, she was in the primetime soap Dynasty, but more recently had guest shots on shows including Grey's Anatomy.
Thank you. Brilliant surgeon. And a handsome man, too.
She was treated for breast cancer in 1988, speaking out for more screenings for women who couldn't afford mammograms. Anna Eliopoulos, Fox News.
Recapping Wall Street, a rally, but not enough to make up all of the losses this week. The Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ up more than 1% today. Trading Fox News.
This news report is brought to you by NetSuite by Oracle, the cloud-based business management software that gives you the visibility and control you need to grow. NetSuite is offering their free guide, 7 key strategies to grow your profits at netsuite.com/Fox.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Paraversal Universe, now in our second hour, produced by WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. Also heard on the Rift Radio Network out of Virginia and WCET out of South Carolina. We're your hosts, Kevin and Jennifer Malek, coming to you from Rylander, Wisconsin, here in the USA at the Northwoods Paranormal Resource Center. You can always enjoy excellent fringe talk radio for awesome and informative radio shows about the paranormal, supernatural, esoteric, and Fortean topics on this network and affiliate platform websites. Not only our show, but many good other shows about different facets of the unknown and unexplained. Much to listen to and much to enjoy. Stream live on TuneIn, iTunes, or the Paranormal Livestream app, available from Android app and iTunes Store. This segment is brought to you by the Supernatural Magazine, where our articles can be read. All right, back to Paraversal Universe, and we are talking to biblical and esoteric historian Gary Wayne, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. An awesome book. I recommend everyone listening to check it out. Gary, are you with us?
I am.
Okay, so we were just about to start talking about Saint Mercurius. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay, so I will hand it over to you and let you continue.
So Saint Mercurius, as we were saying before the break, was from Scythia, and in the time of Decius's reign. So again, in the same time period as Saint Christopher, and he was a mercenary in the Roman army. But what's interesting about him is his father was recorded as being eaten by two dog-headed men, and so when he grows up. And becomes this mercenary, he goes back and he captures many of these savage dog-headed warriors and puts them into Rome's army, and they battle the Berber barbarians in North Africa. And this is where we had talked about previous that there are these great civilizations of dog warriors. And so it's interesting that there's these other ones that show up in Scythia, but again, we're going to find out that they're in more than just one location around the world. And so again, he's a saint in the Catholic tradition because he is martyred in 250 AD because he confesses to being his faith to being Christian to Decius, and Decius hasn't put to death as what he did with Saint Christopher. And so as we move on, we get further on into Catholic history and into the 800s, you get another theologian called Radamus, make sure I say that properly, who wrote a document on the dog men for the church. And again, I just find this absolutely amazing because you don't hear any of this now in churches or anything like that today, Catholic or otherwise. And he believed that the cynocephali were animals or beasts and described them as part of the giants and connected them to being of the same people as St. Christopher. So again, this is not something that sort of went away. This notion of dog warriors and dog men continues down, into the 1800s. And what he says is giants who are counted among the monsters. Almost no one doubts that these were born from humans, so you're getting that implication of human females and gods. And then he moves on down in the verses, and he says, well, cynocephali numbered together with these great monsters, they are even thought to be sentient or distinct, and certainly if things which are read concerning St. Christopher were established. So he is viewing at that point in time that they are a distinct version of these giant monsters, as I sort of understand that reading. And Paul the Deacon in the 700s, he writes a book called Historia Gentis Langobardorum, and he's talking about on an account where Cynocephali are being used as in a way to scare warriors in an opposing army, that they had these dog warriors, and that these dog warriors also, when they captured people and killed people, they drank their blood. So what's interesting about that is that this is a notable sin of the Nephilim before the flood, that they would drink blood, and part of the Dracula sort of mythos that captures that whole serpentine giant mythos in an allegorical way, and as the enemies of Christianity. And so they're describing that, and it's not clear to me that they actually did drink blood, but they're certainly suggesting that that was used to scare the people in the other army. And I think it's all rooted in that overall sort of giant sort of concept of giants drinking blood. Now, moving over to the Armenian church, again, a Christian church, they sometimes depict dogmen in the Pentecostal representations, noting that the dogmen were, they would note them as a race that comes around from the ends of the earth, so not just North Africa or Scythia. So they're recording them as being quite populous. And there's a fellow by the name of Saint Gregory of Nereg in the 900s to about 1,000 of the Armenian church. He recorded baptizing dogmen giants in his Book of Lamentations. And again, he puts in a Scythian link to this in his book, and he says, and I'll just quickly read it. It says, the Scythian and the Greek cruel savage and the fearsome dog-headed giants, and he makes them Christians, baptizing them all as he goes. And so, again, you've got this odd sort of understanding of this church baptizing giants, which means that, they're not necessarily, and I don't think they are either, destined to the lake of fire or to become demons. I think that if you accept God and Jesus, that his sacrifice is greater than all sins. So I think they could still be saved, and I think they're reflecting that in that account. And as we move into the Greek Orthodox Church, which is the church that splits away from the Catholic Church in about 1000 AD over some doctrinal issues and are centered out of Constantinople, they have a very vivid history of these dogmen. And in many of their images, they've got these dogmen are depicted as barbarian enemies who threaten Christ in Psalms 22 that we talked about. So they'll put that Psalms up, and then they'll picture these as dog warriors, as I mentioned earlier in the show. And there's another Byzantine style book called the Kiever Psalter Manuscript, or the Book of the Psalms, by an Archdeacon Spiridon in the 1400s or late 1300s, and he depicted dog warriors surrounding Jesus as well, with medieval dog warrior depictions, that are accounting for the sort of veracity of their belief in these dog warriors. So in their accounts on why they believe this, they take this again back to St. Christopher and to this time Emperor Diocletian's reign, which is 285 to 305 AD, so just after Decius's reign. So that's why I say not all of the different accounts line up, but directionally they're in the same time frame about St. Christopher, and the details are fairly similar. And so they actually have St. Christopher dying in Maximinus Dacian's reign the second. So these later Greek Orthodox accounts, they tell us that Christopher was not only Raphaim as what the Catholic account was, which is, again, the Greek Orthodox comes out of the Catholic Church in the split, but that he was dog-headed and also named Reprobus. So very, very similar accounting, only putting the dog-headed part, which again matches up perfectly with other accounts around the world. And in there's a Greek Orthodox hagiographic or holy book that references a unit of soldiers called the Numerus Marmotarium, or the Marmite, that's in the Berbers of North Africa. And so these are the same accounts where St. Christopher is also taken from. So again, the details of these dog warriors, which are quite common in North Africa, show up in very vivid detail in the Greek Orthodox account. And in their accounts, he's described it as a dog warrior giant, not just a dog man, but actually a giant and a Rephaim. And as the Catholic accounts noted, he was son of a king, so of the royal bloodlines of the Rephaim. And so biblical historians noted that in that time at that area, you have Egyptians who worshiped the dog and the dog warriors and the dog Nephilim that lived there. And again, we get those accounts showing up in the areas of Tripoli and Libya and other parts of North Africa. And again, this is the same account that we're talking about earlier, connecting it back to Canaan and Rephaim, and probably the same as Nebaz that we were talking about, the barking demigod or god, depending on where you want to place them in the pantheon. So as we look at this, I mean, I do want to say that there's also inside the church, because this was a hotly debated item, there's a thought that St. Christopher dog-headed references is more of a creation out of a misunderstanding of words, and that somehow the word canine, or Latin caneus, was mixed with Canaanite. And so they sort of fused those two things together, noting that the mythology and the legend and the historical accounts suggest that the dog warriors and dog Rephaim of North Africa migrated with Put and their peoples from Canaan to North Africa. So that's kind of one of the arguments against St. Christopher being dog-headed. But the Byzantine churches, they always present Christophorus in two formats, and as one format, one as a giant, and a giant that has a dog warrior, and this is just always how they present them. And when I look at how consistent they are in all of their accounts of where they come from, that they were mercenaries, that they were from North Africa, and then combine that with the Armenian and the Catholic accounts, then I start to take all of those details and that time frame and start to look at how does that match up with what some of secular history talks about in terms of these people. Because we've talked everything about Bible references and everything about what the Catholic Church and its offshoot churches later talked about them. But let's look at what historians tell us. And I like to start with Hesiod, because he goes back to between 600 and 700 or 800 BC, and he starts to talk about these types of dog Rephaim or dog Nephilim. And I think in this case, dog Nephilim as before the flood, as opposed to the Rephaim after the flood. And he documents a people called the Hemakunis or the Hemasines, depending on, again, how you want to enunciate that. And there's different accounts on that. But these were the offspring, the dog Nephilim offspring of Gaia and Apophis, son of Zeus. That's who Apophis is. And that they settled in the Mazagete and Libya, or North Africa. And just as we talked about earlier, they formed great cities there. So this comes from Hesiod in 600 to 700 BC. And when he talks about them, he talks about the lands of the Mazagete and the proud Hemakunis or the Hemasines, depending on how you want to pronounce that, and that they were born to Gaia and Epheus. And when he goes on to talk about them, he also speaks about these peoples amongst the Pygmy people. So he's got quite a description of some of these ancient peoples. And if it was just one historian, you could just say, okay, well, maybe he was just recording legend or mythology or whatever. But then we get Herodotus, who's kind of like the father of history. And he describes in his book Histories the Marmite and the Berbers of North Africa and Libya again. And he describes them as being the Kuno Cephali and the Cynocephaly of Greek myth. He understands those as being the same individuals. And he does this in about 400 BC. And he describes them in the same areas and in the same ways as Hesiod does. And again, it's just a significant sort of, I guess, underlining the fact that this was a well-known concept, amongst the older civilizations, that these were people and that they lived in North Africa. And he describes them in a country that has huge snakes and elephants and bears and asps, and included amongst these beasts are these dog-headed men. So again, it's a nice secondary source. And then Pliny of the Romans in 60 to 100 AD, when he lived, he underscores Herodotus' accounts of the dogmen in Africa in his accounting of world history. And he probably provides the most detailed accounting of this in his accounts. And again, it runs, along the same line as what Herodotus and Hesiod were talking about.
Okay. Can we pause here so we can take a...
Yeah, and with that, it is time for our next commercial break. You are listening to Paraversal Universe, and we will be right back with our guest for the next segment.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats.
The first known sighting of a ghost took place right after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in the late 1860s during the administration of Ulysses Grant.
Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998.
Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface.
I say, do you still think it's a meteor, Professor?
I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
It's a place where UFO hunters and scientists gather to examine paranormal activity in the region.
Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right?
On the paranormal, will we see U.S. President Barack Obama's foreign policy go intergalactic in a quest for gold stolen by aliens? We'll tell you at least how the White House responded to claims the chief executive has been teleporting to Mars. But let's get to today's Capitol account.
UFOs, hauntings, psychic abilities, conspiracy, ESP, cryptozoology. There are many things that remain unexplained in the inexplicable world around us, and we're talking about them here, looking for answers on WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama. The truth is out there.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back from our commercial break. This is Paraversal Universe, produced by WBHM Digital Broadcasting. Also heard on the Rift Radio Network and the airwaves at WCET-FM. We're your hosts, Kevin and Jennifer Malek. Our new book, Paraversal Universe, Decade of Diligence, Experiences, Cases, and Insights from the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society Limited, should be out by Halloween, so look for that. This segment is brought to you by the Parasociology like page on Facebook. Parasociology is the study of how paranormal manifestations and experiences can affect a family, group, or collective. Parasociology also examines how spirituality is practiced in different cultures. So go check that out and leave a like for future content. And alrighty, back to the show. This is Paraversal Universe, and we are talking to esoteric and biblical historian Gary Wayne, author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and we are discussing dogmen and Rephaim and connections and all kinds of things. Gary, are you with us?
I am, and we were just getting into Pliny's accounts, who probably has, I think, the most detailed and best descriptions, although there's a lot of other ones. And what he was talking about when he was describing the cynocephaly in North Africa is that they lived, and this is really great in terms of how I look at it, and it's not clear whether or not they were similar peoples or a separate race, but he says certain creatures headed like dogs called cynocephaly, also to the Olabi and Sauropate, who are reported to be 8 cubits high. So I'm not sure whether or not he's referring them as part of those same tribes or these are a separate tribe. But 8 cubits high, depending on how you want to do a cubit at either 18 inches or 21 inches, it's going to make them 12 to 14 feet tall. So you got these other giants and or Rephaim that are living right beside them, and probably because they're probably kin as being from the same type of hybrid being from fallen angels. And he also further noted, Pliny did, a couple of other people called the Toambadi and the Toamafana, who had a dog man as their king and communicated through signs made with his body, because dog people aren't known to have actually talked. If they did, they talked in a sort of a howling manner in between themselves, but they used sign language, as the general mythos goes, to communicate with humans. And he also recorded cynocephaly in the Menasimi nation that kept, and again, this is in Africa as well, that kept harems of wives to breed. And again, this is another Nephilim and Rephaim trait, and where the whole ideology of harems out of the Middle East comes from, so that they could repopulate in great numbers to ensure that their people would survive with their bloodlines. And so these, what they would do to collect these harems is these dogmen that he's talking about, they would actually kill the males of the people that they were warring with, and then take the captured wives into their harems. So we have another Greek historian that I like to mention, because he leads into a couple other areas that opens up a few more details in areas where these dogmen lived, with a 5th century BC historian named Cestius, and he wrote a book called Indica, or India, and he wrote in detail about similar speechless dogmen in India that, again, communicated with the same kind of sign language. And so, and he says, in the mountains in India, men lived with the head of a dog. And he said they speak no language but bark like dogs. So again, you have that barking Nibaz god that we talked about in the Bible earlier on, and now you have a direct sort of connection to thinking that these are all part of the same sort of species of reprobate beings. And he says their teeth are larger than that of dogs, so significantly longer and wider, and that they had nails like those of animals. So they didn't necessarily have all of the dog people have just the head of a man, but they had in some kinds of these beings out there, as being written about with some of these historians, they had more dog-like traits as it ran through the body. And they were called by the people of India, called the Calistri, where the Greek called them Cenophali, and their numbers, and talk about this. And I talked about civilizations in Africa. These ones they numbered, Cestius did, by with a number of about 120,000 of them. And he also described these ones as having tails above their hips like dogs, and that they were more longer and hairier than the normal dogs' tails were. So again, these seem to be slightly different, but still part of the same sort of species as the ones that are out of Africa, and that they live longer than normal men, between 170 and 200 years. And so the idea would be is that more pure the bloodline goes and direct of the bloodline without having a lot of human hybrid blood introduced, that these Rephaim lived to great ages. So anyway, whether or not there's anything to it, but that's sort of the mythos that goes along with that. And as we talk about these dogmen in India, there's another historian Greek historian called Megasthenes, again, about 250 to 300 BC, who traveled to India and then wrote his book. And so he wrote a book that's very, very similar to what Cestius did regarding Mauryan India. But its original version doesn't survive, but fragments do later, as recorded by Diodorus and Siculus, Strabo, and Pliny references him as well, and a few other authors and historians. And he Megasthenes described a dog-headed race living in the mountains of India, just as Cestius said, who communicated by barking and also wore skins of wild animals. So again, very much a similar story to Cestius. And again, Pliny references Cestius's writings in his book Natural History in his account of dogmen in India as well. So 3 accounts of these ones in India. And in his account, Pliny referencing Cestius, he says, there is a kind of men with the heads like dogs, clad all over with the skins of wild beasts, who in lieu of speech use to bark. Armed, they are well appointed with sharp and trenchant nails. And then he moves on later to say, Cestius writeth that there were discovered and known of them above 120,000 in number, by whose report also in a certain country of India. So again, you get these cross-referencing accounts of historians and later first-hand accounts to support some of those references. And I think that's all, sort of goes to, the veracity of the notion that this was common knowledge in the ancient world. But it's also a knowledge that moves into the Middle Ages, just as what we saw in the Byzantine accounts that I talked about within the Greek Orthodox Church, and also in the secular version with Marco Polo, who travels to India and then to China in between 1200 and 1325 AD. And in his book, Livre des Merveilles du Monde, the Book of the Marvels of the World, the Travels of Marco Polo, as it's known in English, he talks about an island called Angamenine, and the people there are without a king and are idolaters and no better than wild beasts. And then he goes on to say, and I assure you, all the men of this island have heads like dogs and teeth and eyes likewise. And in fact, the face, they are all just like big mastiff dogs. And a mastiff dog is this vicious dog of war that Shakespeare likes to refer to, which is also rooted in the etymology of the dogs of war, as in mercenaries, just as we talked about these dog warriors being captured by other nations to be mercenaries in their armies. So all of the meanings as it comes out of the classical writers and the historical accounts all have an allegory of mercenary and connected to dogs and to dog warriors and or dog Nephilim or dog Rephaim. Similarly, you have another medieval explorer. His name is Giovanni da Pia Giovanni in the 1200s, and he wrote about the armies of Ogadai Khan. And again, there's a lot of, this is another rabbit hole, I'll just mention it just for another link, is there's a lot of sort of mythology that the Aga Khan, not the Aga Khan, but the Khan, Genghis Khan, took his bloodlines back to King Og, the Shan and a Rephaim that I mentioned earlier. Just sort of, I don't have anything to substantiate that, but that's how the legend goes as to his royal bloodlines. And so this Giovanni, he encounters a race of dog-headed warriors north of a place called the Dalai Nor, or the Northern Ocean, and or they think is Lake Baikal. And this was a distinct dogman warrior race that is widely held in China. This is not just, again, some, very odd or rare accounts. And it goes back into Chinese history. And you get into the Liang dynasty, which is 500 to 600 AD, and you have a Buddhist missionary who's described an island, and this missionary's name is Hui Shang, an island of the dog-headed men to the east of Fusheng, on an island towards Japan. So you get two accounts from Giovanni and Hu Sheng in the Chinese accounts about this island of dog men. And as you dig deeper into the Chinese account, in the history of the northern dynasties of Lin Yanxiao, which is a Tang dynasty historian who has documented this, he records that there was indeed a dog kingdom recorded in the annals of the history of the northern dynasties of the dogman race. And this has an interesting connections back to the Tengu that I mentioned earlier, who were this bird-like raven falcon race of Nephilim that are called the Tengu. And how that connects back is that the Tengu were a form of heavenly dog, as the Chinese records go, as well as a god that would have a raven-type look. And so the basic Pan-Hu myth, and Pan-Hu is the creator dragon or serpent god of China. Again, all of this is always interconnected as you dig back into prehistory, is a myth about a winged dog or a dragon dog, depending on which account that you're looking at, who transforms into a dog man or changes into a dog man to promising an emperor by the name of Gao Qin in 800 BC to defeat his enemy Quan Chung, and does so. And this dog man after then marries Emperor Gao Qin's daughter, producing a race of dog warrior Nephilim. Again, you get the same type of creation that's documented, only a later version of an impassioned angel doing this, and this would be again in about 800 BC. And one presumes any of these angels or gods that did this after the flood would be sent to the abyss as well. So again, we find that this is a common understanding in Chinese history, as it is in all the other accounts that we've been talking about previously. And so when you look at this sort of changeling quality that is being talked about in the Chinese account, again, it makes you wonder whether or not this is part part of where the werewolf changeling capability comes from as well, which seems to be almost a parallel line to the dogmen, because again, we don't generally get dogmen as changelings. And I just want to throw in one other account, and there's a Muslim Moroccan scholar who traveled the world and wrote a book about his travels in about the 1300s, and he describes a country called Baraknakar, and whose mouths are where people who have mouths that are like dogs, and the men there are shaped like themselves and like most of the body, but they have mouths that are just shaped like dogs. So again, I think when we get these descriptions, there are either different sort of lanes of the creation of these dog warriors or Nephilim, or these are becoming more diluted with human DNA, and they're losing some of those features over time. And so we've got all of these historical accounts to validate the Nephilim and dog warriors from around the world. And I'm thinking that they all have that sort of similar source that what we've been talking about or alluding to. So unless you have some questions, Kevin or Jennifer, in terms of what we've been talking about with these dog warriors or dog men, it might be time to get into the beings that would have created these types of beings.
Well, why don't we take our last commercial break here? We have one more segment yet.
And we'll continue when we come back.
Yeah, and then we'll hit that.
You are listening to Paraversal Universe. We'll be right back with our guests for the final segment.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Abnormal Alabama presents Crypticon October 25th and 26th at the Port of the Wharf, Orange Beach. Bigfoot, the paranormal, authors and speakers, vendors, and your chance to experience the Psychomantium. There'll be a costume contest and much, much more. October 25th and 26th at the Port of the Wharf, Orange Beach. Get more info, directions, and tickets available now at abnormalalabama.com. That's abnormalalabama.com.
Since 1948, Fate Magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour.
Alrighty, we're back, everyone. This is Paraversal Universe, produced by WBHM Digital Broadcasting, also heard on WCET-FM and the Rift Radio Network. We're your hosts, Kevin and Jennifer Malek. We're glad you are with us as always. There are some Facebook group pages we want you to check out. The Ultimate Conspiracies group page is one, which is dedicated to the topics of conspiracies, crimes, and corruption. Also, check out Lake Monstrosities, dedicated to aquatic mysteries and wonders. Feel free to join them both. We would love to see you there. I should also mention we have a group called Cryptid Canines. Or is it Canine Cryptids?
Canine Cryptids.
Canine Cryptids. You can find a bunch of content on the topic we're talking about today. This segment is brought to you by the 5-star Reader's Choice award-winning epic fantasy trilogy Helm by Robert L. Malek. And back to the show. This is Paraversal Universe, and we were talking to esoteric and biblical historian Gary Wayne, author of the wonderful book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Gary, are you with us?
I am, and I know we've provided a fair bit of information to people. That's kind of the main point to show is how much information is out there. So the last part I'm going to try and do is, as brief as I can to get in some of the information as to who created these beings and how this sort of all comes together. So I'm going to start with a Gnostic gospel and sort of link that back in. And if you're not familiar with the Pistis Sophia, there's an interesting section in there in book 4, in chapter 126. And it's describing a dragon of the outer darkness encircling the world, or an Ouroboros that's clutching its tail with a mouth. So again, understand all of this dragon stuff and dog stuff and lion stuff in terms of gods and their offspring has a commonality in prehistory. And as it goes on, it's talking about there's a place of darkness, likely in a different dimension, as I would understand it. There are 12 rulers in 12 chastisement dungeons that we would know from a Christian perspective as a prison or the abyss, as it's talked about in Revelation 9 and in other areas, and maybe as Tartarus, as the Greeks would understand that. And each god's face is different and unique. And what these chastisement arguments do, they're holding these gods who created the laws of creation and created demigod offspring that looked just like them afterwards. And we see references to that in the Bible of the abyss and this chastised dungeons in Jude 1:6, where it's talking about these angels that were put into the abyss and waiting the judgment day in 1 Peter 3:19 and 2 Peter 2:5, just to give some quick biblical references. But I want to get back to what these individuals look like. And I'll describe them all here. In the first dungeon is a crocodile ruler. In the second dungeon, a cat or a lion. In the fourth, a serpent or a dragon. The fifth, a bull, unicorn. In the sixth, boar or a pig. In the seventh, a bear. In the eighth, vulture, raven, the tengu that we're talking about. In the ninth, you have a serpent and a dragon. In the 10th, you have a hydra dragon. In the 11th, you have a hydra cat or lion. And in the 12th, you have a 7-headed or a hydra-like dog. And these are all of these 12 rulers, these very powerful archons that have been placed into the abyss. And this one in the fourth dungeon has, a dog's face as his authentic face, and his name is called Arkarok. And so when we look at Arkarok, this means, as we take that back into Hebrews, I take those words back, you get arch as in archangel or archo, and archon, all meaning first rank, chief, and ruler as a top-ranking angel, which shows you how high these rulers were that are locked into this abyss. And you also have the word Arak, which means Rosh, as it goes back to Hebrew for head, and also used in the prophecy of Genesis 3:15 for the serpent seed, and with the Gog and Magog war. Understanding Gog and Magog in Greek mythology was a giant as the offspring of Iapetus. So again, just making some of those connections. So as we move into the root of these angels who would have produced these dog Nephilim, the first one that comes to mind, as we talked about previously, would be Anubis. And Anubis was the son of Ra, or another one of the parent Ogdoad gods. And understand that the Ogdoad gods are mostly serpents and or a few other looks like birds and dogs and other animals as well, but mostly they were serpent gods. And Anubis was the god of the dead, god of the afterlife, gods of ghosts, which are demon spirits of the Rephaim, and god of the underworld, where the abyss is, and guardian of the scales, and very similar as to God that we described in the Assyrian and Babylon pantheon as Nergal. Anubis's glyph was a jackal. A jackal was another form of dog, and again, that's very much connected in there. And his cult center was in Sinopolis in Upper Egypt, and that is translated as the city of the dogs, and variantly known as Lycopolis or Wolf City. So bringing that wolf or werewolf thing back into being very much related to the dog warrior or the dog Nephilim understanding. And when we look at who Anubis's offspring were, he produced individuals that were known as a barker, just as what he was as a barker. And so these children wandered throughout the world. So from an Egyptian prehistory perspective, this would be where most of the dog people came from, although I would suspect that they have similar accounts in each, as we talked about with the Chinese, that would suggest that those ones spread around. But that just shows you that they ultimately go back to the same source originally. And so when we look at other Egyptian gods, where most of the accounts come from on the dog people, you have another Egyptian god named Upawat or Wapawawet, same god, and that's the Egyptian god of war, and he accompanies souls to the underworld, and he's often associated with Anubis. So, and he's also depicted as a jackal and a wolf or a dog, and so he could also be one of the offspring of Anubis as well. We also have another dog in the Egyptian pantheon called Set. And he's a dog deity that has a man, is a man with a dog's head, and his long tail. He has a long tail and a curved snout, erect ears, and it depicts again a fox or a jackal or a dog. So what you want to do is understand that there are many of these angels that may have been reproducing these dog people after their images. We also have other dogs or other gods in the pantheon of Egypt that have different looks, as we mentioned, let's say as Horus and as in the falcon sort of aspect, as well as another one called Duamutef, who's also depicted with a jackal's head, and his depictions will be the ones that you see on canopic jars, which are basically funerary jars. And again, there are other ones that are part of the Egyptian pantheon. I won't go through all of them, but I'm just giving sort of an understanding as to where some of these dogs would have come from. And Anubis and that cult of dog gods and Nephilim is sort of one of the greater sources, just as you have Sirius and the dog star and the gods that are associated with the Sirius as another route for the creation of these kinds of dogs and other animals that show up as hunting dogs and mastiffs and the golden hound of Zeus or Zeus in Greek mythology. It all sort of goes back to that same sort of root with the same type of gods, just as Hecate in the Greek pantheon was the Greek goddess of the underworld, as Anubis was, and of dogs. And Hecate is described as a dog god or accompanied and announced with barking or howling. And what's really interesting as we get into some of these understanding of these dog gods and what dogs do is with the howling aspect of it, is you have Satan, who is the leader of all of these gods, even the 12 rulers that are in the Pistis of Sophia that it talks about. And we get this interesting character that comes out of Isaiah 14, which is Hail El, that is used for the word Lucifer, and the actual Hebrew is Hail El ben Shakar, Hail El, son of the morning. And Hail out of Hail El is where the etymology of hell comes from and where the abyss is located, and a significant amount of other words that are associated with the underworld, as we know that comes out of the Bible. But what's even more important as we look at Hail El, it's jointly rooted in H3213, which is Yelal, which means to howl or howling and or wailing. And, that is one of those essential sort of, I guess, labels of a satanic cult with images of the wolf and jackals and Nephilim and demons, and the howling aspect, Yelal, which is also applied in Isaiah 14:29, following a reference on the serpent's root, which is connected back to Genesis 3:15 with the serpent seed of Genesis 6, as I take that in my research. And it's talking about this whole understanding of howling. And so in Isaiah 13, for example, we get a very clear use of that where it says, "Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand, and it shall come at the destruction of the Almighty." And I know I'm running short on time, so I'm just going to get a few other things in here. But understand that this is the wailing that goes on with this type of God and cult and part of the occult. And these beings in Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 34 are the same beings, or same verses that are listing the dragons and the unicorns or the bulls and the owls and the ravens. And again, I think all of this is just pointing back to a history in the Bible that is showing us that we can make connections to understand what is going on outside of the Bible if we want to take the time to dig into it and to sort of decipher it. So when we look at H3213 Yelal, it means howl, howling, and wailing. And as it's described in many of the verses of the Bible, it's like you have these mongrel beings that are mad after the idols that they sacrifice to the devils. That's talked about in Psalms 106. And devils goes back to H7700, which is a demon or a daemon spirit or the offspring of a bodiless Nephilim. And again, all I'm doing is sort of quickly running through to make a connection here that all of these terms have a common source. That's why you can find so many dots that are connected. And I think we need to be aware of this as we move into the end time. Because we're going to see what happened in the days of Noah in the end time. And that's so
interesting. And you're right.
Very much. Yeah.
That's right.
And we're not only getting the technology, but we're also expecting in the various alien mythoses and others that these beings are going to return. And what's interesting in Daniel 2:43 is it talks about the descendants of these metallic dynasties of the Rephaim. They commingle with human seed as part of the 10-king beast empire of the end time. And I'm wondering whether or not that is alluding to that we're going to see more of a mingling of that for the end time. But just making a sort of a prophetic connection as we close out the show.
We're going to have to, end it there. We have 3 minutes left, and we need one of them. So for the last 2 minutes, if you would like to share links where people can find you, anything at all that you want to share.
Well, thank you for letting me do that. So if you liked what I was talking about today and you wanted the documents or some of the related documents that I was talking about, you can get a hold of me through my website, the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6conspiracy.com. On there, I've got a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters in my book. And if you want to ask me a question or get some of these documents, just email me through the website. And also, if you're looking to buy a book, You can get one there. You can get it through Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or order it through your local bookstore if they don't have it on the shelf, because it's distributed by Bookmasters. You can also follow me on Facebook. I try and get a commentary up that's rather interesting about every week and a half or so. This series was part of that, was what I do as an ongoing sort of research that I do and putting things together for people. And so if you get a hold of me there or want to ask me a question, I will get back to you. And you can also follow me on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63. And again, if you get a hold of me there, I will get back to you. So I have, I have documents on the linemen. I have documents on the Tengu. I also have a document that I'm putting together that'll be out in the next 3 or 4 days that I'm going to connect all of the serpent aspect of this together, even though I talk extensively of that all through my book.
All right. Gary, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate it.
Yes, this was a wonderful interview, and everybody enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for having me. So I know we covered a lot of material, but I think people are they want this extra detail, so I like to provide it whenever I can.
And you did an exceptional job. Most exceptional. All righty. We'll be back next week with another Paralogian Report, news and current events, and history analysis with a diverse panel of Paralogians. Feel free to support any of the networks mentioned here tonight, as well as the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society Limited 501c3 nonprofit organization, by donating. It's folks like you who ensure these excellent organizations will be here tomorrow. To the believer, the evidence is overwhelming.
And to the skeptic, there will never be enough.
Thank you. Good night. God bless you. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you here next time.
Good night, everyone.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. The best in paranormal talk radio.